Who were the Galatians? Where were they? And why was Paul writing to them? The epistle to the Galatians is the earliest epistle of Paul that we have. Written very early. Now there is some dispute over when it was written, but almost certainly no later than maybe 52 AD and no earlier than maybe 46 AD. Most scholars date the council in Jerusalem to settle the dispute over the issue of circumcision to have taken place probably in the year 48 or 49. So the question is, did Paul write before or after this council? Now, I'm not going to get into all the details of why certain people think it was before or after. I tend to believe or agree with the scholars that say it happened before, that it was a couple of years before. And so it would have been written about the same time or immediately after James's epistle had gone out. So these are about the same time. And this would date it to about either 46 or 47 AD, around there. Now, some of the reasons why, or some of the things that support this theory that I tend to agree with is there's mention of prophecy that is most likely the prophecy of Agabus that we read about foretelling the dearth that would come, and that dearth comes in the late 40s, probably. So his reference to it would make sense here. He also talks about the care for the poor, commending them for their sending provisions for the poor. And that is mentioned earlier in Acts, before that council in Jerusalem, when Paul and Barnabas came back to give their initial report, as is recorded in Acts chapter 11. So these things tend to suggest to me that it was an earlier date. But then who are the Galatians? Now, I've known for a while Galatia was a Roman province in the Asia Minor area, what we call today Turkey. Now, exactly where it was, how far it extended, I'm not sure. Some say it was on the Mediterranean coast, on the southern end of Asia Minor, but others say it was more central. Most agree that it was somewhat west, but there are some that say it was a little bit more farther to the east. There's some dispute over where it was. However, Galatians were an ethnic group of Celts from Europe. And the Celts of this time they would have been from northern Western Europe, France, Germany, that area. And after Alexander the Great, he went on his conquest, conquered most of them from Greece all the way east to India, to Persia, conquered it all. He then dies very young, and his kingdom fractures and splits into four main nations, four main kingdoms. For a short time, the Greek kingdoms become destabilized, and we have a raiding and pillaging period of the Galatians throughout at least Western Asia Minor, going a little bit east. When the local kingdoms rise up again in strength and start defeating the Galatians and driving them back, the Galatians kind of settle in and become permanent settlers and largely mercenaries. And that's all a couple hundred years before Christ. About 50 years before Christ, the Romans come through and take over the area, and it becomes a province of Rome. But these aren't even Greeks. These are Europeans. These are the Celts of Northern Europe. They are not only not Jews, but they're not even of the Greek area. They are foreigners. Far enough away that they would not have any... they're somewhat familiar with the Jews now. They've been living in the Hellenized area. But you understand what I mean. They're from farther away that would not have had any real contact with the Middle East. They would have had... the only contact they would have had with the Middle East would have been through Greece until fairly recently in history. On a final note, the name Galatians kind of comes from the Celtic name of the Gauls, who would have been in France. That's where the name Galatians come from. It's Galatians, I believe, translates to Gauls among the Greeks. But the question then is, was Paul writing to the province, or was he writing to the ethnic group? I think he's writing to the churches that we've read that he's already been to, the cities he's been to: Perga, Iconium, Lystra, Derbe, Antioch of Pisidia. These are all cities of the Galatians. These are the people, the Galatian people would have been settling in these cities for the last 100 years or so. So is he writing just to them, or is he writing to the cities? I think he's writing to the cities, because he's writing to the saints in these cities, not just one group of saints, but he's writing to all the saints, whether they're of Jewish ancestry or Galatian ancestry. So I think it's more likely that he's writing to the region and not to any particular group of people. Now, going back to the timing of this, his initial missionary journey into this area would have happened around the year 45, maybe 44, the earliest. So if the letter was written in 47 and he was teaching in these cities in 45, then it's only about 2 years later. He probably spent a year, maybe two, going through all the area before he returned to Antioch, as we read. And then from Antioch, a year or so after he gets back to Antioch, he's writing this letter. So he is very involved in the spiritual affairs of the people, even though he's no longer physically there. He keeps up. He's getting the news, and he's responding to it. He may have gotten a letter from the people in the Galatian area asking him questions, and that's why he's writing the letter. We don't really know why he's writing the letter. We know that there was some disputations. There were some false gospels going on. I mean, Galatians has the famous quote that if I or an angel declare a different gospel to you, let him be accursed, So there was obviously somebody was there preaching a false gospel, and Paul is responding to it. But what exactly they were preaching, we don't know. We have no record of that. And if he doesn't specifically state that he is responding to a letter that was sent to him. He does state that in a couple other of his epistles, but not in Galatians. And so it seems to me it's more likely he came back to Antioch and then he gets news. Probably they send some people from these cities to Antioch because there is this controversy. There are people preaching a false gospel, and those who are trying to be faithful are getting confused, and they send a delegation to get Paul to settle the issue. So Paul writes this letter. And that's about all we need to say on the subject. So let us get into it. Let us read Paul's first letter that he wrote to the early saints.